government's view of the economy could be summed up in a few short phrases. If it moves, tax it. If it keeps moving, regulate it. And if it stops moving, subsidize it. Now, what is the government doing? To discuss all this and more today, we have individuals in the caliber of Dhananath Fernando, CEO of the Advocata Institute, Daniel Alphonsus, CEO of the Examiner, Dr. Rohantha Athukorala, former chairman EDB, CEO, Clootrack South Asia, as well as Chanaka Wickramasuriya, economic consultant. Now, to pose questions from our panelists this evening, on to my immediate right is Shihar Anis, independent journalist, and also you too can join in as far as the conversation is concerned. The number to send in your WhatsApp messages is 076 656 5353. The number once again 076 656 5353. Our topic of discussion today is economy. So let's get the ball rolling today with Dhananath Fernando, CEO of Advocata Institute. Hi Dhananath, good evening. Nice to have you on board.
Thank you very much for having me again.
Cricket is not something that we are going to discuss today. So
I've been already told not to speak about cricket today. So
yeah, we are discussing about the country's economy. Dhananath, now things are looking right now very steady for the government. They seem to be on the track of achieving all the IMF targets. Expenditure with regard to capital is a bit of a problem at the moment, but apart from that, they seem to be on the right track. But last time on the show you said the government seems to be just on a very defensive mode. They are not hitting sixes, they are just on a very defensive mode. So given the fact that you love cricket, Dhananath, what are they doing now? Are they playing sixes, are they playing the fours, or still on a defensive approach as far as the country's economy is concerned? The time starts now.
simply, Shamir, on the same cricket analogy, they are still on the defensive mode. Growth reforms are not taking place yet, but the revenue targets have been achieved. However, at the same time, the capital expenditure is low. But overall point of view, I think the status quo remains as it is. They haven't done anything drastically wrong, except we have concerns about the electricity bill reversal plus the gambling and the gaming act. I think those two were mistakes. But one point that I would like to drive is while they are defensive, while we brag about achieving the revenue targets, also we have to keep in mind actually the government's revenue is actually government's expenditure, because ultimately what I mean by that is government can achieve the revenue target, but actually somehow they have to cover their entire expenditure one way or the other. Either they have to tax it the next year to reach that budget deficit, or they have to inflate it out. So ultimately people have to pay. We should not, okay, it is good that we achieve the revenue targets, but we have to also keep a tab on expenditure, because already while our capital expenditure is low, our recurrent expenditure has slightly increased. So overall growth reforms are still very slow, and stability is there, but we have to keep in mind we are not still out of the woods. Stability, as it was famously said, stability is not everything, but without stability everything is nothing. But in this case, growth at one particular point is what brings stability, because if we do not grow, our debt will be unsustainable, and we will fall back to the same crisis that we were in 2020.
So summing up, based on what you said, Dhananath, the government is on a slow but steady approach as far as the country's economy is concerned, which is good or bad news?
It's both good and bad, Shamir. Stability wise, the keeping stability is important, but my worry is the other side of the coin is without growth, and growth, I mean, you need to do the reforms now to see growth in the coming years, but that is not happening. Mainly most of those growth reforms are on the factor markets: land, labor, capital, and to an extent entrepreneurship and the regulatory framework.
Right. So Dhananath, you said that the government has made two mistakes so far, that is the reversal of the Electricity Act as well as the Gambling Act, and we all know what exactly transpired on that. But I want to bring to your attention, from the 1st of October, that is today, the government decided to abolish the SVAT scheme. Is this the right move forward?
Opinion is divided, Shamir. I think in my view it is a mistake abolishing it, because I think it's a reasonable system, and without, especially if you are bringing a new system, ideally you should have a better system with credibility to get the exporters, importers, business communities trust that the new system will work better. Even many months ago, when I think the business community met President, he has assured that the new system will be better and he will take the responsibility that the returns will be done on time, is what we saw on news. The other side is the claim from the IRD's front is, okay, they have been given revenue targets and some people are misusing the system. So I think that's divided, but in my view it is a mistake, because by eroding the credibility and the trustworthiness of the business community, and if they have to incur an additional cost because of that, they have to tied up cash at the IRD, it is a mistake, because then you have to incur, I think you know the story, I think all businessmen know the story, because they have to borrow money to manage their cash flow, and in this environment it is difficult. So what we are planning to propose on this front is, this is what we have seen multiple times, because since the IRD has been given revenue targets, now they are ruthlessly going behind the people who are paying taxes, and they are trying to do a lot of things which also make the taxpayers quite uncomfortable. So what we are trying to propose is also a tax ombudsman. So in these cases, actually, that you have an independent body, at least you can get some relief, because otherwise if you move through the same process, it's difficult. So that's the, I mean, on a policy angle as a solution, that's what we could recommend, but in my view, without having a credibility to the new system, it is a mistake. But also the claim from the other side is that some people are misusing the system, and that's why they have to consider a new system. But the information of the new reimbursements and all that is still yet to be known.
So Dhananath, you said that the President, after meeting the business community, has assured that he would take responsibility to reimburse the businessman within 45 days. Now that has to be taken with a pinch of salt, because in the event the IRD does not reimburse, it's not the President who is going to pay and say, guess what, your cash flows are stuck, so I'm going to lend you money. It's not going to come from the JVP or the NPP fund for sure. At the end of the day, the people have to pay the brunt. How is it going to affect the SME sector at large? Because the big boys would be able to stomach this at least for 90 to 120 days. But if the government is looking at expanding and bringing the entrepreneurship to the country, how is this going to affect in the longer run?
Very badly, for sure, because as we all know, 99% of our organizations or the businesses are enterprises are micro, small and medium enterprises. So they are basically on a very tight cash flow. So if they have to tied up money with the IRD, definitely their finance cost will increase, and in certain cases they will not be competitive with that, incurring that finance cost, and they will not be able to compete, that including the exporters. So no doubt that it will have a negative impact. I think these concerns have been raised not only by like the think tanks like us, I mean we commented on it, but also I think the chartered accountants, industry representatives, everyone has brought this up. But I think and also I think there's a misconception that it's an IMF condition. It is not. IMF generally gives you the revenue targets. They will give a budget deficit target, they will give an expenditure ceiling or a target, but generally IMF do not say do this, do that. It is basically your country's officials are proposing to reach this target, this is the program or the project that we are going to do. So I don't think it is fair.
So the government is hiding behind the IMF veil when implementing such a ruthless decision going forward.
That may be the case, that has been the case, because it's easy to blame the IMF rather than blaming your own officials. But I think we have to understand there are two sides, but if we have a better solution. But what I have heard when we had the conversations with chartered accountants, actually this SVAT, this voucher system is a reasonable system even on a global standard. Because it solves a lot of other issues and it could have been replicated. That's what some of the chartered accountants have mentioned. But again, I'm sure there are people who are misusing the system. But important thing is, as we all know, on a general management theory, if you are bringing a new alternative, you have to show that it is better than the previous one, and you have to communicate it properly and show the results. In advance, to get the trust of the other stakeholders.
Right. So one final question, Dhananath, before I move to Daniel. Now, the government has a revenue target of 18 billion US dollars for the export sector this year. Now, the worry that most of the exporters have is the fact that how is the SVAT scheme going to really dwindle these numbers down moving forward? Do you think that's going to happen by the end of this year, or will we see that effect beginning 2026 or in that entire period?
In terms of exports target, Samir, what we did, while there was a target, we didn't see the program, like how are you going to improve the exports to 18 billion was not very clear. But of course, exports are growing at about 6% compared to the previous year. From the pace it is going, I do not see it can hit 18 billion, of course, for multiple reasons. There's a US tariff challenge, there's a SVAT issue. More than that, internally we have a lot of issues in terms of customs, in terms of tariffs, in terms of regulatory barriers, everything, electricity prices, everything basically is pulling you back on achieving that target. But I think at the moment the stability comes mainly from tourism, basically going back to pretty much pre-COVID level, pre-Easter attack level, and the remittances have picked up for about approximately about 700 million per month. So most likely we will hit about 7 billion this year, and the weather has been very kind. We really didn't see a drought, so as a result the renewable energy contribution to the grid was better. Those three factors remains, and also in terms of some of the regulatory reforms done previously, mainly the central bank independence. So that brings the stability on the monetary system, and weather has been kind, and tourism and remittances have been back on track. Exports haven't, it's growing at 6%, it wasn't badly performing, so that's what brings the stability. But if we continue, to achieve a target, we have to have a program, a project, reforms to really achieve the 18 billion target.
Right. Thank you very much, Dhananath, Fernando, CEO of Advocata. We just can't keep away from cricket, can we?
Maybe I'll try to bring
Right. I now move my attention towards Daniel Alphonsus, CEO of the Examiner. Daniel also worked for full disclosure, worked with the Wickramasuriya UNP government during the Hapalne as well. So Daniel, just to understand, how do you view the country's economy right now? We're meeting you after some time, so just to understand, how do you perceive the country's economy in the current context?
Yeah, so these views are my own, not the views of the Examiner. I think at the moment there are two major priorities. The short-term priority is poverty alleviation. As a result of the crisis, the poverty level almost tripled, and today it's around double what it used to be before the crisis. More than 20% of our citizens are in a state of poverty. So that's an immediate priority. The other major priority is for the long term, which is our exports. If you look at our exports over the last 2 decades, as a share of developing country exports, it's halved. In other words, not all other countries are performing a lot better than us. Developing countries are performing a lot better than we are doing. So I think those are the two main priorities, and we really don't see enough happening on either of those two fronts. I think in that context, there are 3 things that the government really should focus on. The first is reducing the cost of living, primarily through para-tariff reform. That's PAL and CES, removing those. The second is public investment. Infrastructure came to a halt as a result of the sovereign debt crisis and other public investment as well. So that's another major priority. The third is, as Dhananath mentioned, the factor markets. The land market, the capital market, and the labor market. So if we look at the first point, which relates directly to both poverty and to export competitiveness, is the cost of living in Sri Lanka. 50% of the expenditure of the poor, of 50% of society, is on food. Our food prices are considerably higher than other parts of the world because we place so many taxes at the border. CES, PAL, etc., and these taxes cascade. We also have all kinds of licensing and other de facto licensing regimes that also drive up the cost. So in my view, what the government should really focus on is first establishing visibility. tracking these food prices on a week-by-week or month-by-month basis and identifying the key drivers that are driving up these costs, especially the para-tariffs, and addressing them. So that's on the food side, but also on the non-food side. If you look, for example, at the price of cement, INSEE is a Thai company that also has a plant in Lanka. The cost of cement in Thailand is about half the price of Sri Lanka from the same company. Why is that? It's because we have these para-tariffs in place, we have higher tariffs, we have inefficient border procedures, and we have a lack of competition. So these are the things that the government needs to focus on, both in terms of the cost of living for citizens, but also because it affects our export competitiveness. Companies can't build factories, they can't begin operations, and the cost of their inputs is high when you have all these para-tariffs in place. A tax on imports is a tax on exports. Okay, so now that we've addressed tariffs, the second part was on public investment. As everyone knows, as a result of the crisis, major infrastructure projects, the Central Expressway, the LRT, the Kalani Valley Line, a whole range of public investment projects were suspended and put on hold. Those need to begin. It's very encouraging that finally the Central Expressway is kicking off, but there's a whole pipeline that needs to restart. If you look at Sri Lanka's public expenditure as a share of GDP, even before the crisis, it was half of India's, less than half of India's actually, and other developing countries as well. If you look at public expenditure this year, for the first 5 months of this year, it was less than last year. So we're having major problems in how much we're allocating to capital expenditure and then in our disbursement of it. So that's, I think, a major priority that needs to take place. In addition to that, in addition to the public investment side, we really need to unlock private investment. The government doesn't have enough money to upgrade the port. We see the delays that have happened with the East Container Terminal. Jaya Container Terminal, the cranes are 30 years old. That's affecting the productivity. We see in the grid we need billions of dollars to manage the renewable energy systems that are coming in place. In public transportation, which has been identified as a major source of, a major barrier to growth, we have not had any substantial investment in the railways. So there's huge investment requirements that the government is unable to fully float itself. It should increase its share, but we also need to unlock private investment. In Kerala, we have PPPs for roads. This is a communist government that has a PPP system for roads. We can't do even basic PPPs in areas which are much more common for doing those things. So that's on public investment. Finally, on the factor markets. So land, capital, labor. Here, for decades, we have seen a lack of progress. Land in particular, the government owns the vast majority of land in this country. It is not using it productively. Secondly, it is placing restrictions even on private landowners, how they use their land. Often, a crop can be more efficiently planted on a piece of land, but the government restricts them from doing that via legislation like the Paddy Lands Act, and in the case of the tea estates, other regulations. So that needs to be addressed to improve the quality, the agricultural yields. Then, if we look at the capital markets, we saw Sri Lankan Airlines, CEB, CPC, all borrowing huge amounts of money and running very inefficiently. This was possible because our capital markets are not functioning. Capital allocation is not functioning properly. And part of the reason is this, the state-owned banks, they have not been subject to proper disclosure guidelines and proper governance guidelines. And that's something that really needs to change.
Right. So, Daniel, just to understand, in a nutshell, what you said, are you satisfied with the way the government is progressing right now in terms of the country's economy? Is it a yes or a no? I know I'm asking a very open-ended question, but is it a yes or a no?
It's a no, because we have we've just come out of a major crisis. We need a sense of urgency.
Right. So, given the fact you say no, I just want to drag your attention to the statement that was issued by the World Bank on the Public Finance Review on the 9th of September 2025. They say Sri Lanka has made remarkable strides in stabilizing its economy, undertaking one of the largest fiscal adjustments in its history, equal to nearly 8% of GDP over 3 years. Now, this seems to be contradicting to what you said before in terms of reducing cost of living, public expenditure, and factor marketing, private public investments and all that and more.
So Shamir, on this show, we've discussed this multiple times. Reducing your debt to GDP ratio, which is what the fiscal consolidation was fundamentally about, involves increasing your revenue, managing your expenditure, and increasing growth. What we've done a pretty good job of is increasing our revenue. We've done very little on the expenditure side. There's a lot of inefficiency in the system. You see from the public sector wage bill, that's not really gone down substantially. But most importantly, we've not done the reforms that are required to unlock growth. That's really the problem. Right. And that's where we need that sense of urgency, because this stuff takes time. So it can't be done overnight.
So the World Bank is wrong? Is that what you're saying?
No, they're not wrong. They're focused on one bit in that specific comment. Elsewhere, I'm sure in that report, they would have also discussed the structural reforms needed for growth.
Right. One final question before I move to Rohantha. Just to understand, Daniel, I'm trying to figure out when the World Bank is saying the government is doing well, and you are saying the government is not doing well, but in public investments, for an example, if you start now you said the capital expenditure, that was the same sentiment that was echoed by Dhananath as well. Let's say we start rolling out the projects now. When will we start implementing these projects? Because the last 3 years, we've done somewhat of stabilization. Let's say we want to now spend money and get the ball rolling with the public investments, the public private partnerships and so on and so forth. This is not going to be easy.
No, and it really depends on the scale and complexity of the project. If it's a simple project like macadamizing a rural road, that's a fairly quick turnaround time. But if it involves a complex project, let's say something like the LRT, where you have land acquisition, environmental impact assessments, tendering for different components, etc., that takes a long time, the financing package, etc. Those things can often take years. I think the Southern Expressway, the process started in the late 90s, early 2000s. By the time it actually came online, it was nearly 2010. So it really varies, but especially for the large, big-ticket infrastructure projects that both really drive productivity and generate that construction value chain that boosts growth, it takes a while.
Right. Thanks a lot, Daniel. I now move my attention towards Dr. Rohantha Athukorala, former chairman, EDB, and CEO of Clootrack, South Asia. Rohantha, for our viewers to understand, now we are posting a 6% growth on exports right now in the country as we speak, which is better than last year. I just want to understand from you, because you were the former chairman of EDB, is this growth satisfactory given the fact that Sri Lanka is coming out of a bankrupt situation?
Thank you, Shamir. See, if you look at, as you mentioned, the World Bank report, Shamir, it says very clearly that Sri Lanka is one of the top rung for recovery as against 123 countries since 1980. And I think that recovery has come through because of our revenue cycles really pushing through, which happens to be exports and tourism. So given the current challenges in the global marketplace, especially with the Trump tax, I think our exporters have done quite a considerable job in terms of driving overall numbers. But I think what's important right now is everybody is looking at growth, but the latest statistics coming from the Department of Census and Statistics is very alarming. As at now, we have only 3.8% of the people who are unemployed, which essentially means that we don't have people. Now the question is that if you are looking at a 20 billion target this year in terms of exports, we are looking at 4 billion, 4.5 billion coming from tourism. The question is that how does this growth happen? So there are only two ways. Number one is that you need more people in the workforce, or secondly, you got to increase productivity. Now, how can you have people on the workforce when our unemployment rate is 3.8%? So, there is a serious crunch when it comes to people. And we are looking at new properties being opened in the tourism front. We know that, India is going to open up for further deep trade in regard to the apparel sector. Currently, it's like 7 million pieces, but if the comprehensive economic partnership is signed, it will go up to 30 million. So, I think the demand chain, if I may say, is going to be positive to Sri Lanka. But then the question is our supply chain. We are absolutely in very challenging times. And the point I think Daniel made is very, very important, because our poverty is at 21%. And if you look at places like Munragala, poverty has gone up to 44%. So, in this backdrop, what happens is that the people who are buying the electric cars, and what we see is more Colombo centric. So, if you look at the overall mix in the last 5 years, Shamir, the poor have got poorer while the rich has got more rich, because you have two huge cycles from the stock exchange and the different other options that the rich has become more richer. So, we have a challenging issue for the government. Whilst our exports are up 6%, tourism is up 30%.
Yeah, but Rohantha, if you look at the capital markets are fairly done well, because I can give you a classic example. Just a couple of months ago, a stock of a blue chip company of a bank which stood at 79 rupees, after they declared that a private, a global bank is going to be taken over by them, the stock market went up to around 329 of a particular share. So if you look at it, if you invested 10 million in shares in this particular stock in question, you would have made a 34 million profit on that share alone. So, given that fact, the capital markets are doing well, isn't it?
Sure, but then you're talking about 55,000 people. See, who is playing that game? So that's the point I'm saying, Shamir. The growth is focused on Colombo and its suburbs, and if you look at the lower quartiles in the population, they are struggling, and that's why you see 6.8 million votes first time around, and that is general elections. And then when it came to the local government, it dropped down to 4.3 million. And if you're looking at the provincial council elections coming up, we don't know whether the current trajectory is about 3 million.
The numbers will dwindle even further?
See, if you look at, that's the point I'm saying, if you look at the statistics per se, and you say that your unemployment rates are picking up out of Colombo, and that, the poverty levels are picking up, obviously that's going to be reflective of the people putting their hand up. So whilst everything looks very positive, I mean $100 billion this year the economy is going to be Sri Lanka. World Bank is saying, as I said, one of the top economies. But the question is that this upheaval has not been seen by certain quarters of the community, which is why the numbers are picking up. So, the answer to your question, yes, I'm thrilled to see the export numbers, and I think this year we might maybe hit 19 billion, 18.7 billion or $19 billion. Right. But then in our exports, but then the question is that, we have a huge crunch, and if you really go to analyze, what the country now requires is innovation and entrepreneurship. Now, innovation will come only if businesses are linked to the university system that propels innovation. Now, if that link is not coming through strongly, what happens is you can't drive productivity up. And if your productivity cannot be put up, all these numbers are only statistics, because the numbers cannot be delivered because we don't have people.
Yeah, so I just want to ask you one final question, Rohantha, on this SVAT scheme itself, because I want to touch a little bit about this before we go on to the Q&A from Shihar. So now, the export industry alone, based on what government predicts, will bring in around 18 billion US dollars to the country's economy. However, the SVAT initially, when it was introduced, it was supposed to be introduced across the board, without any exception to any party, especially those in the digital world. But they exempted the digital world up until the 1st of April next year, and went ahead and started putting that VAT on an 18 billion already matured industry. Is it fair?
Well, I don't know what the numbers of the leakage is. If the leakage is only 3%, I don't know whether this kind of reform is going to actually kick in the benefits to the economy.
Yeah, so I just want to quip a quote that was made by the Tea Exporters Association chairman during the annual general meeting. He said that out of the 100% of the production of the Sri Lankan tea market, 93% are exports, and only 7% is on the domestic front. And out of the 7%, 4% is manipulated by a large-scale domestic organization in Sri Lanka. So there's only leakage of 3%. So is it fair to really tax 93% of the exporters in the tea industry, only looking at that mere 3%?
See, if you look at
the saving, it's approximately around 12 cents.
Yeah. I mean, if you look at the bigger picture, Shamir, we know that the diagnostic study that was done in 2023 by IMF showed that Sri Lanka is one of the most corrupt countries in the world. And everybody knows that they have given a 16-point plan, and that 16-point plan includes the asset declaration that all the public sector has to make. So that has come to play today, and we see the social media really picking up on that. Now, in line with that, if you are looking at on this whole governance angle that the whole hinge of the story is on, well, it's a bold move to make. But the question is that, are you ready? Is the system ready? Is the question. Now, I would say a more prudent approach would have been to test this out first, and
See
somewhat
with it works.
And the model says that test it among 2 or 3 exporters, and in fact some people have put their hand up and said test on me. So I am actually questioning as to why it wasn't done, because then you make sure that the system is ready for this change, because at the end of the day this is your bread and butter in terms of income.
Right. Thank you
but
very
again,
much.
my question, Shamir, is the unemployment.
Right.
Nobody addresses that we don't have people.
Yeah, so we will speak about all this, Rohantha, as the show goes on along. Thank you very much, Dr. Rohantha Athukorala, former chairman, EDB, CEO of Clootrack South Asia. I now move my attention towards Chanaka Wickramasuriya, economic consultant. We had Chanaka a few months ago on the energy crisis that was plaguing the country. So my questions, the opening question is going to be related to that, Chanaka. Now, Dhananath said that the IMF does not bring in any regulations per se. However, if you look at the IMF staff agreement, they had 2 contingent factors. One was the implementation of prior actions relating to restoring electricity cost recovery pricing and ensuring proper function of the automatic electricity price adjustment mechanism. So it goes without saying that the IMF is really involved in macro economic factors in the country.
Yeah. So look, I think on the energy side, largely the IMF is concerned about price recovery across all energy sales, not just electricity, but petroleum, etc. as well, because as you know, historical budget deficits have been largely driven by the subsidies across energy over decades. And I think this has been largely achieved. Some tweaks to how the energy pricing mechanism will take place going forward requires some work, and that's still a little bit work in progress on the electricity side. On the petroleum side, it's largely working. So I don't think there is too much of a challenge there, Shamir, to be honest. Yes, the IMF did get involved in sort of fairly granular detail on how that needs to be achieved.
I said macro before, but it should have been micro.
It should be exactly. Yes, I know what you know what you intended to say. Yes.
Yeah.
So it was micro level sort of involvement. They wanted, in the case of electricity, the bulk supply transaction account in place, and so on and so forth. They went down to fairly granular detail in how that needs to be achieved, and like I said, it's work in progress. Tariff policy is going to come through now with the new Energy Act, so that will come out through a public consultation process, etc. So that will lay out how electricity pricing will move forward in the future, hopefully with less controversies and volatilities that we've had in the past. So that all of that is, I'm confident, is sort of under control, and will come across.
No, but I'm just trying to figure out. I know now the IMF program is done and dusted. We are on track, but I just want to understand why something as micro as electricity was on the agenda in these two contingencies. One contingency was electricity. The second contingency was about the restructuring of the debt.
Of the CB
multilateral and the bilateral donors. So I'm trying to figure out, why did they stoop down to those very trivial or micro level factors?
No, it wasn't trivial. It had to be fixed, because you couldn't have a situation where any of these utilities go back into the red, because that has a huge fiscal strain on the government balance sheet and the P&L if that happens. So they clearly wanted to avoid that going forward, because if the wrong energy prices get set in a system, it's very hard to reverse as well. So they clearly wanted a mechanism that was transparent and workable for the system going forward. And like I said, it's some of it is work in progress. And I think it was a big problem of the fiscal deficit in the past through decades, incorrect energy pricing, but I'm happy to say that has largely been fixed.
Yeah, but the issue is, Chanaka, when Dhananath and Daniel as well as Rohantha spoke, they said about the cost of living has really gone up.
Yeah.
So you don't want the CEB making money. You want to have a subsidized price, making sure it's break even.
Yes.
But so if you look at the CEB profits the last year and the second quarter of this year, they're doing extremely well. It's like a privately well managed.
So there was a lot of volatility in the pricing. They did badly some quarters, they did well in some quarters. There needed to be a clawback on over profits in another quarter, and so on and so forth. So
but overall, let's take the year as a whole.
So if you take a year, I think they made a bit of a profit, yes. But I think what's important is, again, this tariff methodology that was used is now subject to change. They are fixing it. So there was a lot of problems, no question about it. And all of this is currently work in progress, and it'll hopefully get fixed so that you don't have this kind of volatility.
My problem is, why are they talking about the CEB only when there are so much of leakage in the state-owned enterprises?
Yes. Now look.
They don't talk about that.
Yes.
Talking about the CEB only.
Look. This is only one area of reform. Look, you're absolutely right. Shamir, as we discussed around the table here, this gentleman said the macro variables largely stabilized, right? But going from there, if one is to unlock growth, right, and address the issues of poverty, unaffordability, lack of employment, and all the things that everybody has raised so far, there are a lot of things that have to be done with respect to reforms across many sectors. And you can talk about labor, you can talk about the factor markets, you can talk about private ownership of sectors that are, foreign ownership of sectors that are restricted. There are so many sectors. There was a recent State Department report that highlighted all of those things. Now, the question I have and the concern I have, does the government have the ideological conviction to make these changes? And that is the biggest problem. Because I get the sense that the government still believes in a state-driven economic growth model. And the problem, there are two problems with that. One is, A, we don't have the money for it. We got a balance sheet that's shot to pieces. We don't have the, Daniel talked about all the public spending projects. Even for those, whether we have the fiscal space to accommodate those is an issue. And if you don't, if you're still going to believe in the state-driven economic growth model, you're going to get yourself in a bind, because the only alternative is private sector investment.
Right. Thanks a lot, Chanaka. We'll of course try and grill the four of you in the next 1 hour or so, just to understand whether we're on track or not, constructively, with the proper engagement. So I want to open the floor for questions from Shreya.
I'll start with Rohantha first. You made an interesting observation that the rich people are getting more richer and poor people are getting more poorer. Now, in the past, we have seen when there's this kind of scenario, it has led to insurrections in the past, right? So, how do you see the economic growth in this scenario? How do you see the economic growth to avoid, this kind of imbalances?
There's only one way, Sharon, and that happens to be SME focused, small medium enterprise. So, I mean, I've been traveling across the country on SME development through one of the Rotary projects that we are doing, and we touch base in Gaul, Kurnagalar, Jaffna, right across different, and last week we were in Kandy actually, and what we see is that the problem is not access to finance. I mean, we got, I think, 28 different access to finance options right now being offered. But what we need is mentoring. Now, we know that these SMEs are going to, are the people who are the backbone of the country. 52% of the GDP is driven by SMEs and MSMEs. So, if we can focus on this sector, we need to have the incubators, we need to have the new product development support, how we can make them a little bit more competitive to enter the global market. That is one way we can address the poverty issue. It's not just only looking at the corporate sector and looking at how new product development is happening in the corporate sector, because if you look at the latest report by Papercube Research, it shows that only 45% of households income, I keep saying this all the time, 45% people's income is more than expenditure, which means 55.
But Rohantha, if you look at the numbers, even Daniel spoke about this, right after the bankruptcy, we had approximately 3 times the poverty levels increased.
Yeah.
Daniel made this remark in his opening statement as well. But now if you look at the numbers, it is only doubled to what it was before. So technically, theoretically, when you look at the numbers, the cost of living, which stood at around 80-90% post bankruptcy, has come down to single digits and sometimes even negative. So this is good news. When you say there is an issue, what is the real issue?
See, look at data. If you look at the cost of goods have increased by 300%. So maybe year on year there is no increase, but the 300% has not come down. It has not come down. You look at the latest data by Papercube Research, it shows you how the cost has gone up by 300%. It has not yet come down. So that's one. Point two, you're very right, Shamir, when you said that poverty was very high. Yes, it was at about, I think, 91% of households income was lesser than expenditure.
It was approximately around 8 million
So
people.
in July 2023, when the presidential election was held, only 8% of households income was more than expenditure. So that's why the result was very, very evident. So now the question is that now it has come to 45%. But the answer to your question, Sharon, is that yes, 55% of households income is not covering the expenditure, which means that they are putting their hand into the savings, which is why you see the pawning booths in every town. So we are not looking at that is the reality that is
So my
throwing out.
question is, Rohantha, what does this mean for economic growth at this juncture?
We have to look at the only way that I see the most practical option is, and the most tangible and the most accessible is small medium enterprise. We know that they contribute to 52%. We know the kinds of products they market. I mean, I've seen to my own eyes. We are trying to see how we, from our own way of Rotary, trying to see how we can tie up with the global market.
But Rohantha, you see, from 2005, I have seen this, the governments, INGOs, NGOs, are trying to help these SMEs at grassroots level. What you said about incubator and mentoring, everything is being given. Why it's not working at the grassroots level?
See, it is not that it's not working, it's just that the kind of contribution that you would make for incremental growth, because of the sheer size, is tough. Like for example, there's a lady who makes life jackets, right, in Gaul. Now, what did we do? We tied up with the Sri Lanka Standards Institute, see how she can be certified to enter the UK market. And we got an order for her. But then the question is that she needs to ramp up her operations at the back end to cater to that demand. Now for that, what she needs is a little bit of mentoring and support. She has access to finance. So,
but she's lucky, Rohantha, that she has access to finance. Not everyone has access to finance. The moment you go to a bank, they'll say, where's your collateral?
No, so you're right, but now for example, there is a scheme.
She's an exception. When you say support, she has financial support, that's good news.
But Shamir, do you know that right now there is a ADB loan, $50 million, and they're waiting to give the next $50 million. They're saying up to 25 million, you get 67 collateral free, which means that the ADB gives. But the answer to your question, you're right. When these guys go to a bank, you're spot on. Huh? When they go to a bank, they never talk about that particular financial option. They would talk about all the options that the relevant bank gives you. So these are the small bottlenecks I see practically at the ground, which...
Just to get the air cleared out, are you saying there is $50 million of offer by the ADB
Asian Development Bank,
to SMEs?
SMEs. It's actually
without collateral.
67% collateral is backed by ADB up to 25 million, Shamil, and the utilization of that is about 40%. So now this is real ground. Now the question is that we need some people at the ground who can help these kinds of gates to be crossed. Now, so we need people on the ground. There is a lot of policy being discussed, right. But the question is that if you don't get into the ground level, now 1 year has gone, what happens is that, you already have a challenge where people are saying from 6.8 million to up to 4.3 million. So,
right. So because you spoke about the ADB, I have a question for Dhananath in the same vein. Very recently, the central bank forecasted a GDP growth of 4.5% plus, and even you came on the show, Dhananath, last time and said, if you don't make any mistakes, 5% is achievable. However, the ADB report, which was issued yesterday, clearly says that the forecast now is 3.9% for this year and 3.3% for the year 2026. Now, former governor, Dr. Kumaraswamy, said a month ago that Sri Lanka needs transformative growth of at least 5% plus in 2026 if to come to even closer to paying the first tranche of loans in the year 2027. Now, given all these factors, this doesn't augur that well in terms of the country's march forward.
Absolutely, Shamil. So that's why I said, if you do not grow the economy, it will challenge the stability at one point. At the moment, economy is stable, but if we do not grow enough, we are compromising our stability. So that's why it's important. But unfortunately, Shamir, there is no point discussing any more about growth without unleashing our factor markets. It's simple as that, because without bringing down, I mean, without solving our land issue, without bringing the para tariffs down, which Daniel spoke about, mainly on 4 items. First, cement, tiles, sanitary ware and steel, because those are the 4 components which is requires to like do the structural things, even for a regardless of poor or rich, that those are the basic needs. I mean, for a industry, for a factory, for a small eatery, anything you need those. You can do nice interior curtains, carpets, everything, but you need steel, wall tiles, sanitary ware, cement.
Yeah, but just correct me if I'm wrong, Dhananath. Sanitary ware is exempted from VAT.
VAT, but when it comes to, I'm not sure about VAT, but when it comes to cess, PAL, I think the overall tariff rate on sanitary ware is approximately about 90%.
Right. Now, posing another question back to you on the same front. Now, let's say they reduce the tariff on cement, steel, so on and so forth that you mentioned. Would the companies in question, the private sector in the country, would they reduce the prices based on that price reduction? And how would the government monitor whether they have done it or not?
Simply, Shamir, the prices will come down. It was not.
Yeah, but would they do that? Because let's take cement for an example. Now, Daniel spoke about this as well. There are only a few players in the market, and he gave an example of a Thailand-based company as well. So there are only 2 or 3 players in the market right now. Let's say these 2-3 players get together and decide, no, our price structure is going to be at this level, even though the government reduce the prices. They will initially reduce it a little bit just to please the government, and they would increase it again. But ultimately, their profit margins are going to go up, their CS ratios are going to go up, whereas people are going to face the brunt at the end of the day.
No, Shamir, the problem is we are not allowing imports to take place. That's why the local players are manipulating the market. It was not that I said it. It was the president who said it when he was launching his economic manifesto in front of the entire business community, that when the tile, I mean, when you ban the tile imports and when you, what happened to the prices. And then even people were in like, you know, on a waiting list to get the tile and sanitary ware, which was like main items for any construction. So basically when you cut down the para tariffs, cess and PAL and other tariffs, the prices will come down, because already if you go to, I mean, on these items, Navala, at least it's still somewhat cheaper than what you can get it at higher prices.
But do you agree with the fact that if they do not open imports, the current market players can manipulate?
Absolutely, that's what is exactly happening.
So it has to be both ways.
I mean, absolutely. When you bring down the import tariff, either the local market players have to be competitive, or they have to go out of the market.
Because based on what I hear, cement and steel, the CS ratio of most of the companies is around 40 to 45%.
Absolutely.
So they're making a killing out of.
Exactly. So that's the problem. So rather than a killing, Shamir, I would say we are paying, all the citizens are, rather than, you know, they are making a killing, at the same time we are paying 2 times the price than the global market for those basic needs. So that is unfair, and I think this budget will be a decisive one for the president, because since he stands as the poor man's friend, or whether he represents the poorest of the poor, I mean, because when it comes to the voting bloc, this budget will decide whether he can cut down or amend the para tariffs targeting the poorest of the poor. And that will have an impact on across all the other items, like, you know, this cement, steel, tiles, sanitary ware. It will have an impact on rest of it. So it's very.
So, but let's take even these companies, just to give some context to it, Dhananath. Let's take cement for an example. There's one big player who owns tiles, who owns cement, who owns energy now. You know, there's only one player.
No, exactly. That's the point, because most of these areas are, Shamir, also either a monopoly or a duopoly. And if it's in a different country, if you have the proper competitive regulation, some of those transactions are not viable to begin with, because your number 1 player has acquired the number 2 player in the market, which is not possible in another country, which is completely anti-competitive, and we do not have anti-monopoly laws, and we don't have the regulatory framework. But my point is, this budget is decisive. I hope the president will take it seriously, because it was not our words, it was his words at addressing all the business community, and this has an impact, which I have spoken, on the tourism industry and the
No, but he has said in Japan that he's not going to increase taxes.
taxes. That's the personal taxes. But this is about taxes which the government doesn't make money on one side. At the same time, we are asking the poorest of the poor people to pay for it, which is unfair.
Dhananath, in your initial remarks, you said about the reforms for growth, right? So, are you satisfied with the reforms that this government has done so far, and what the president has to do during the budget to spur the growth in future?
Thanks, Shah. So, as I mentioned, we haven't really seen growth enhancing reforms after the government came into power. What they have basically done was maintaining the stability, like IMF program, accelerating the debt restructuring process, all that was right. That's what I said. Stability wise, they have maintained the status quo. But growth is a different game. Sorry,
True. What do they have to do?
Yeah, exactly. First, they have to, couple of suggestions. Accelerate BIMSAVIA. That's one of our main suggestions as Advocata as well, because at the moment, this BIMSAVIA is not a new program.
So you are talking about the land reforms.
Land reforms, BIMSAVIA, because
including what? What should it include?
Yes, so it includes giving proper titles for the land plots. This is a few reasons why we say it's a priority.
So BIMSAVIA was introduced by which government?
It was coming from 1994, if I remember right. So this is not a new program, but this is also in the NPP manifesto very clearly. They have
but they are the same people who said that 76 years of problems have led to us in this situation. So do you think a 1994 policy that was rolled out by the government then would be implemented by this government?
I think, Shamir, it was two reasons. One thing is, it's in there, there is no other way that you can solve this problem. There are reforms needs to be done for BIMSAVIA itself, because there are, titleship ownership challenges, and the mediation boards are not functioning, because it is in the manifesto, so it's in their mandate, because otherwise how are you going to give like the land rights to people? So that's number one reform.
Can you explain why BIMSAVIA is so important for economic growth?
So, Shiar, when it comes to land ownership, there's a concept called deed, which most of the people have. That is like a history of ownership. Imagine you and I come to an agreement, and that agreement will be registered under a registry, and there's a history. That's called the deed. Title is a ownership backed by the government on a cadastral system. So BIMSAVIA is, it's on a torrent system which is quite outdated. They have to amend that, but it's a state-backed ownership. So that is important, because the same issue that you raise, when you go to the bank, they will ask for collateral. When you go to the bank, when you go with the deed, they have to go with their lawyers to the land office and check the deeds for about 30 to 40 years to make sure that this land is actually owned by you, because there are cases, including one of the embassies in Sri Lanka, there were two people contesting with two deeds for the same plot of land, and this is very common in Sri Lanka. So if you solve that issue, that will unlock a lot of capital, number one. Number two, at the moment there are about 16 million land plots. They have done, after this like 30 years, only 1 million. On average, they do about 50,000 per year. If you do 50,000 per year, it will take 300 years to complete all these 16 million land plots. So that's important, because that's one of the factor markets. So answering your question, what can be done on growth? Definitely accelerate BIMSAVIA. There are resource challenges, there are regulatory challenges. Since the government has 2/3 majority, since it's clearly mentioned in their mandate, since this is a project that is not new, no one will say can say this is a foreign conspiracy, someone is going to take your land away and all that, because it's coming from 1994. This is aligning with a lot of political, economic dynamics. So that's why we prioritize it as number one. Definitely cutting down para tariffs. It was not we said it, it was the president himself said it. It was pretty much known to everyone, the business community. If you go to the hotel industry, because the room rates are higher, because you cannot refurbish a hotel because of this cost of construction. that those two are quite important. The third one is a tax ombudsman because of this particular challenge that we have faced. But also I would like to very quickly highlight a point since you spoke about exports. Also I would like to remember while we speak about exports, there was a time a lot of people claimed that exporters took their money from 54 billion hidden somewhere, and what has happened to that. And now we are again coming back to boosting exports. Now I would like to question back from those who claim that. So then what happened? Like now exports are coming. Do you still think that people are hiding the money overseas? So I think when you make claims, I think over a period of time you will get you will get to the reality. But it's important that we unlock these factor markets if we want to see growth.
So Daniel, now talking about the stock market now, if you look at the stock market, how it works right now, there are several top companies in the market who are manipulating shares, and you can see the stock market being very bullish. Now, if you look at what Rohantha said before, Rohantha said only 55,000 people are active. Out of these 55,000 people who are active in the stock market, if you look at the spread of wealth in the stock market, it's only around 25 to 30 players who are having portfolios of over 20 billion or 25 billion for that matter. So don't you think it's important to tax those who are making gains in the stock market as well?
I think you make a very good point on tax administration. So a lot of discussion the last couple of years has been on the tax rates. That's what percent of your income do you pay as tax. I think what's really important to focus on the next couple of years is not so much on the rates, but ensuring that those that ought to pay tax actually pay tax. And that involves reforming the Inland Revenue Department. The Inland Revenue Department is understaffed. They have, I think, a cadre vacancy, 300 cadre vacancies. The government has only released 100 officers. Secondly, the level of digitization is extremely poor. The challenge I'd place before the IRD and the government is, say, within 5 years, have a target of going completely paperless. Third is focusing on large taxpayers. I think you very rightly point out to a concentration of return coming from a few taxpayers. The challenge is to ensure the IRD really focuses on those people and does proper audits and ensures that they are fully paying their taxes rather than going in behind small and medium enterprises and other small minnows. They really need to focus on the whales. So that means really setting up the large taxpayer unit in the IRD properly, staffing it properly, and ensuring that it functions well.
Because if you look at it, Daniel, the bank interest rates are very low at the moment, and if you look at the gains that you can get from the stock market, is around 15 to 20%. And if you look at the gains at the bank, if you take some money and put it on FD, it's around 7 to 8%. That's the rate that's hovering right now. But if you put it in the stock market in the longer run, because we've had individuals in the caliber of Sujya Mudlige who has been propagating that people have to invest in the stock market because that's the easy way out. But don't you think this has to be taxed at the end of the day, at least the high net worth individuals, and make sure they pay their taxes to the government? As Dhananath said, don't go behind the people who are paying taxes already, but go behind those who are not paying taxes and broaden the net accordingly.
Yeah, so I think that was my answer, to really improve the quality of tax administration.
So do you think, Daniel, moving forward, the government has to look at taxing those operating in the Colombo stock market as well?
Yeah, of course. Any form of income that falls within the existing policies of the government should be taxed. The problem at the moment is of proper audits and proper data collection to ensure that that takes place. So it's really a question of tax administration. I think one area where the government could really increase revenue, of course, is on land taxation. It was in the original IMF program as a structural benchmark. It's been delayed now in terms of the planning process, but a huge amount of capital and wealth is locked up in land in the country, and people, especially in Colombo and the Western Province, have experienced extraordinary capital gains over the last couple of decades. and I think some of that should be captured for the benefit of broader society. And it'll also force efficient use of land. Right now, a lot of land is idle because you have no opportunity costs.
Right, well, one question before I move, give an opportunity to share. Same question posing to Daniel. Daniel, we have a question from one of our viewers. They're asking, leading international banks, two banks, have already said that they want to leave the retail business in Sri Lanka. Would this affect FDIs flowing into the country?
I don't think it'll directly have an effect on FDIs because they haven't given up their corporate banking establishments in Sri Lanka. So it'll still, will still be part of the global network of finance. I think what was discouraging though is that when they put these assets up for sale, that a foreign buyer didn't come in, because that would have brought in new technology, new competition, and new managerial techniques into the market. HSBC, for example, was a pioneer in Sri Lanka in terms of technology and managerial practices, shaping the entire banking industry. So I think it would have been encouraging if a highly innovative foreign player had taken on those assets to bring in more competition into the market. So here we see a consolidation of the market, and we see an existing player who isn't necessarily at the cutting edge globally of the industry coming in and making that purchase. So I think it's a bit of a shame, but I don't think it's a major thing either way.
Chanaka, if you see the macroeconomic indicators, interest rates have come down, then inflation from 70% to then it went to deflation, now it's again in the lower single digit, currency has stabilized. Right? How do you see, all these macroeconomic indicators are favoring investments and expansion of private sector businesses? Do you see it happening?
No, look, so as we discussed earlier, macro variables have been stabilized, they're heading in the right direction, all that's good. Unlocking growth is a different paradigm completely, right? And with regard to that and largely needs to get focused on private sector investment for the reasons I articulated earlier, because the government doesn't have the bandwidth to invest, and it will be unlikely to have that bandwidth in the near future either. So everything needs to be focused on unlocking private investment. Now you can focus on unlocking private investment or domestic private investors, as well as, more importantly, trying to unlock FDI. Right? This has to be, in my opinion, the single most priority factor for this government. It should be. Whether it is or not, I don't know.
Why it's not happening?
So, in order for that to happen, we discussed a little bit about the factor markets. Dhananath elaborated a lot on one of them, which is land. The other two are labor and capital. So we can talk a little bit about labor. There needs to be labor reform, right? And I think there is a draft act in the making and all of that, but the government will have to be very brave and expend a little bit of their political capital to get that going. I don't know ideologically where they stand on this at the moment. The other one is capital. Now, how do you attract international capital into this country, right? What is it that needs to get done, right? So for that, you need the right regulatory environment, you have the right enabling environment in order to attract this. Now, there's a multiple benefits from attracting foreign capital, right? For investment, whether it's locally funded or not, is going to require dollars. Even if it's a local investor that invests in a project, and anything is largely dollar required, because there is a large import factor into any sort of large investments, right? Which we don't have. We don't have the dollars. So that's another reason, that's one reason why you need foreign direct investment. The second is, with FDI comes the knowledge transfer. And I can give you scores of examples of how foreign direct investment and the knowledge transfer that it has brought into this country has catalyzed so many industries, right? So the second benefit of FDI is the knowledge transfer element that comes in. So if this government needs to address all the other issues that we talked of, employment, poverty alleviation, improving real incomes, all of that has to come through an FDI regime. And now there is little to no focus, as I see it, for that. Firstly, because there is an ideological issue, right? The government I question whether they ideologically believe that it is a private sector driven growth model that we need. I don't see that. I get the sense that the government feels that it is still a state driven growth model, let alone private sector driven.
If I may, Shihar, just to add to that, I think public and private investment can also be very complementary. So if you look, for example, at the Colombo port, ECT and the Jaya Container Terminal together are probably worth well north of $1 billion. If the government attracted a foreign private investor, you'd get the FDI in, they would then invest in those terminals, in the cranes, in the systems and so on and so forth. And that $1 billion+, the government could then invest in critical public transportation projects like the LRT, like the Kalni Valley line, like air-conditioned buses across Colombo. So from a balance sheet point of view, the government would continue to own assets. It would just be assets that the private sector cannot provide.
No, but
while in the port sector, you could unlock all that private investment and then through that enable public investment.
So I just want to ask you, Daniel, now. It's a good idea, you know, you want to bring in $1 billion worth of investment, all that is good, well and good. But if you look at on paper, there are only 3 companies in Sri Lanka who have the agencies for big shipping lines. It has not been liberalized at all. As a result of that, these companies are making the call in the shots and making sure they enforce everything that is required to make sure that their balance sheets are doing well.
I completely agree with you, and I think this points to a more fundamental problem which relates to successive governments. In Sri Lanka, what we've had is in every specific domain, ad hoc policy making based on specific interest groups. What we see is a lack of principles being established on what the role of the state is, what the role of foreign investors are, what the role of local companies are. We need to have clarity on these principles and apply them consistently across different sectors, because we don't see that. We see some sectors are open to foreign investment, some sectors are not, and the basis of that is purely arbitrary in many cases.
So whatever they do, they have to first of all address the fundamental flaws in how things are being put in play.
Absolutely, and I think you raise a very good example in terms of freight forwarding. There is absolutely no reason for there to be ownership restrictions. At the moment, 40% of a shipping agency can be owned by a foreign principal at the moment. This is extremely unusual for any transshipment port. It affects the competitiveness of Colombo port versus other ports, and it also increases costs for exporters and importers. So it's effectively something that is a form of rent seeking.
Right. So Chanaka, one question, Shihar, because we were speaking to Chanaka about FDIs and all that. I recollect, Shihar, just add to this if you remember. I watched the show last week. I was not in the country. And we had the NPP representative saying that Sri Lanka has received $1 billion as realized FDIs.
Excluding the port city.
Yeah, okay.
Excluding port city.
Excluding port city. You were there, so you know better.
Yeah.
I just want to understand, Chanaka, can you just elaborate on this 1 billion FDIs that have come?
I have no idea where they got this 1 billion number from, and I don't see where this 1 billion has been invested in. See, firstly, this FDI number is sometimes gets a little misconstrued and misleading, because the way FDI is calculated, and Dhananath, you know this probably better than I do, is it includes part of the retained, it includes the retained earnings of existing foreign-owned businesses. So, for example, if you take a Dialogue, and it makes 100 and it pays a 10 out as a dividend, and that goes out to whoever the Malaysian shareholder is, 90 is retained, that 90 is considered FDI, right? So this FDI number needs to be demystified and disaggregated to understand actually what is the true foreign direct investment that came into a country. Now the foreign direct investment also can come in 2 mechanisms. It can be debt or equity, right? So, for example, if a bank borrows a credit line from somewhere, some IFC or ADB or something like that gets into a bank, well, that is also FDI, but that is debt. The key FDI is equity FDI, because with equity FDI comes a real business. comes knowledge transfer, comes a guy who's going to invest for the next 10, 15 years, will employ people. That is the key FDI component that people need to focus on, right?
So this is because one of the SLPP parliamentarians from Clootrack district, now he's a parliamentarian. He once said the money is coming in a ship.
Yes, so I mean, how do you even argue with comments like that, Shavir? It's impossible, right? But the reality is no, I mean, you don't even know where to start.
Plastic was a better.
It's right. But this is it, guys. I mean, if this country is to start moving in the right direction and address all the issues that we've talked of so far, we have to bring new capital into this country, and we need to increase our knowledge. We are way behind the curve. We've got to leapfrog.
Right. So I just want to ask a question from Rohantha with regard to this unemployment that you raised, Rohantha. It's one of the critical issues for Sri Lanka. Why? Because if you look at the past, this government has been advocating that all the graduates have to be given government jobs. We've seen this. There have been protests. There's been multiple occasions in which there has been complete paralysis of the country's economy because of these protests that took place. However, we heard that Lanka, who is a strongman of this government, said, don't expect the government now to give you all jobs. That is not our priority. So do you think going forward that giving government jobs will come to a standstill? And if that happens, how is this going to contribute to the country's economy?
See, it's a tough one. I mean, there is some degree of reform happening in the university front. For example, out of the 48,000 graduates who are in the system, in the university system, almost 12,800 are in the arts faculty. So now, I was on that team actually that developed the University Grants Commission strategy for the next 5 years. So what we are saying is that everybody must be taught a life skill like computer. So even if you're an arts graduate, you have to go through skill training on computer. So we are trying to see as to how you can equip them to get into the system. So that's one strategy which has been done. Second, of course, we know that at the provincial level there is a strategy in terms of where people are getting mentored to get into the system at a rural level and at a like a semi-urban level. But again, the question is, I go back to SMEs. This particular mentality of a graduate beautifully fits in to the small medium enterprise. Maybe they might not fit into the corporate sector. So whatever matching that you do at the ground end, it works. I mean, I don't know whether you believe me, but one program that we did in Kandy last week, there were about 12 micro SMEs who refused to write their name or even give any details on the registration. So I asked them, why is it that you don't want to do that? They said they are all running companies which they don't pay VAT. So they want to continue, being in the informal sector because they believe that that's the place where they can earn money, without paying VAT. So then I sat with them and I was like asking them, do you know that, you need to get into the big boys game, and the only way you can do that is to set up a company, look at a venture capitalist buying you up, and then subsequently they will help you in it. So the strategy is, Shamil, the answer to your question is, I think we need to
give jobs or don't give jobs?
No, we need to move this discussion of looking at the economy on what we see in the business section of all the papers, because what we see there is only the corporate community. You will never see the 52% of this economy which are small medium enterprise driven. And I keep telling this to Daily FT editor, why don't you have a column, one whole column, 2 pages only for the SME sector who contribute 52%, because you never see those people's faces. I mean, I can tell you tomorrow what the papers are going to look like.
Definitely, Maithripala Sirisena is going to read that. He reads the papers and only gets to know what happened in the government. No?
So Shamir, the point is that the way out is how do you link this university graduates into the economy, and it will be done only through the small medium enterprise.
But it also should come with educational reforms, I guess.
Yeah, sure.
Right.
Sure.
Dhananath, yes, you
Yeah,
have a
just
question.
what- yeah, yeah.
No, please go ahead.
Yeah.
Sir.
Dhananath, now you spoke about the reforms, right? The electricity reforms, and you said you were not happy because it was reversed from privatization to state-owned. Basically, they are owning. The government has more weight on the reform. Now that has signaled that this government also want to own more things. They want to do more things than giving it to the private sector. How concerned are you? Because we have seen the failure of government-owned business and enterprises in the past, right? And it has led to the crisis, right? And this was spoken much after the crisis, and that also forced Ranil Wickramasuriya government to go for these reforms and look for privatization. I mean, how concerned are you?
No, definitely very concerning. But before that, on a lighter note, I want to respectfully disagree with Daniel. He said this liberalization is because of, lack of liberalization shipping is because of ad hoc policy making. But I think it's called a syndrome. I think everyone wants to liberalize except their industry. They say, shippers comes and say, we are globally connected, liberalize everything, but don't touch our thing. And same with, if you go
Even
to
the tea
construction,
industry.
exactly, tea industry, you are globally connected, tea hub, everything, but please don't touch our industry, do everything else.
Everybody wants change except us.
Exactly, you have to change everything
And the big
except
boys have established outside operations.
Absolutely. So that's a
So
syndrome
they
called.
don't want to liberalize it here.
Rather than the ad hoc policy, it's a syndrome called liberalize everything except my industry, on a lighter note. But we are very concerned about this signaling, because the challenge was, I think Chanaka is an expert, but our concern was with the reforms we will not be able to attract the investment, which was because to upgrade the grid, to do all these changes, we need money ultimately, and we all know the government doesn't have money. That was even a grade 6 kid knows the government doesn't have money. So you cannot really depend on the government investment to do it. But I think Chanaka made a very valid point, whether that they have the ideological conviction on to make it a the private sector led model. But my point is, we do not have an option. What is the other option? If you go to the state led model, we are again going back to modern monetary theory. We are again going back to pointing fingers for the exporters, saying that you hid the money, $52 billion, because otherwise where is it going to end? Because it's the same state-led model that failed us drastically, owning on the same point everything, trying to own everything. And again, we need to understand government owns 30% of every business. In Shamir's business, my business, Daniel's business, Chanaka's business, everything, they own minimum 30%. If you are not owning a company, they can go up to 36% by taxing you. So without doing anything, government owns 30%. So there is no need to own separately. You already own the port example. Own at least on profits, they own 30%. On value addition, you have to pay another 18%. So actually on revenue, if you are exceeding the VAT threshold, you have to pay 18%. So overall, 30% on revenue, 18% on the value addition on revenue, on VAT. So altogether, it's approximately more than 40% approximately. So government really do not need to come and do business because they already own. That's number one. The other thing is, I think on this protectionism thing, or like having these import tariffs, I think Ministry of Industries have to take a hard stance. I feel the Ministry of Industries is protecting businesses rather than promoting it. In their mandate, it is to bring the competitiveness, but instead of, they are focusing on bringing anti-dumping laws and all that. Okay, anti-dumping is a problem, that's a separate conversation. But by trying to increase tariffs, you really cannot promote businesses. These what Rohantha speaks about, these micro and small medium enterprises, you really cannot promote them by having so many tariffs on tiles, steel, at the same time so many tariffs on the particular goods and services. That is not the way forward. So I think they have to step forward and promote instead of protect. That's important. And on the people's factor, I will give you a classic example, because we spoke about factor markets, we spoke about a little bit on labor. This is a classic, I mean, real life example. There was a particular hotel who wanted, again on tourism industry, high end hotel, they wanted to lay marbles, and now they went to BOI because on the labor on laying marbles is not available in Sri Lanka. There may be people, but you know, these marbles are very high end marbles, you have to have those lasers and everything, very high tech to lay it. So basically the BOI didn't allow, because our labor markets is not, you know, easy to bring down people. So what they did, they brought the Chinese on tourist visa, and every time after that particular period, that the tourists had to, I mean, as a tourist, they are the marble layers, and they had to go to because that this since he's a Chinese citizen, he cannot go to India. He had to go to Maldives or somewhere and come back and again lay the marbles. And look at, on an investment point of view, what a waste of time, money, and everything. So, and also we should not forget, we are an aging population. After 2032, 1 out of every 4 will be falling under the aging population category. So, we have to consider the labor markets. That's unproductive, that's one side, but at the same time there are a lot of labor regulations that's restricting us, especially the TEVA, the same thing that we have spoken. But overall, Shamir, this is wrong signaling, asking the state sector to do it, and we really do not have the capacity. We should not do it because the government already owns it. At the same time, this will add more and more cost and make us more and more uncompetitive, and our exports will be the ultimate victim.
So Daniel, you spoke about private-public partnerships. So if you look at the 1970s and 1980s, when the country's economy was open, there were many companies who went ahead and did so well because of the private-public partnerships that came into play. And it really benefited the country as well, because at the end of the day, there was new technology that came in. If you look at the Victoria Dam, for an example, it was a public-private partnership, and there was new technology that was brought in to build that dam at that time. So if you look at it overall, how important is it to leverage on this moving forward? Don't you think the government has to really accelerate this private-public partnership concept to make sure that we are on the right pedestal?
Absolutely, because we've just come out of a debt crisis. The government was bankrupt. The government can't fulfill the investment requirements that the country needs over the coming years. That means you need to get the private sector involved in fulfilling those investment requirements, in building roads, in upgrading the railway system, in the electricity sector, across a whole range of sectors, the ports. The government doesn't have the money required to invest, which is partly why our investment ratios lag hugely behind our peers and our infrastructure lags behind our peers. So it's absolutely critical for the government, in my view, just like it has a public investment pipeline. That's a list of projects that the government plans to invest in. It should establish a public-private partnership pipeline, a list of projects that are shovel-ready, where they can open up for RFPs and get the private sector involved on a transparent, competitive basis. But I think it's absolutely vital. And can I just add one more point on that, just to add to Dhananath's point as well. The government is too busy trying to do too many things. There's no reason for the government to be investing in areas where the private sector is willing to invest. What we need the government to own and what we need the government to invest is where the private sector won't invest, where there are, or where it's really difficult for them to invest. So there's certain bits of the railway that it makes sense for the government to invest, certain bits of the grid sometimes, but really in other areas where we can get private capital in, we should get the private capital in, and where we can't get the private capital in, that's where the government should allocate its scarce resources.
Because at the end of the day, Daniel, let's not forget the fact that just because of an ego of one man, the Sri Lankan Airlines Emirates deal fell apart. It's just it's stupidity, and it's another level of absurdity.
And it's tragic. Most people think about the losses, which are huge. They're colossal. But as big a cost is the opportunity cost. Colombo port is one of the 25th largest ports in the world. Colombo could similarly have been an aviation hub. Under Sri Lankan Airlines, we became the largest carrier into India. We're no longer that. Colombo could have really become a hub airport for the region if Sri Lankan Airlines had continued on that trajectory. But that trajectory was lost. Colombo is not a serious hub as a result of the ego of one man, as you put it.
So, Chanaka, speaking about Sri Lankan Airlines, now when we speak about, whenever I travel on Sri Lankan Airlines, the flight is always packed. And I asked the stewards or the crew, why is it packed and why are you still making losses? Do you have an answer for that?
Look, I mean, I think, I'm not sure what routes you're flying, but certain routes are certainly profitable. But airlines are slightly, complex animals. I mean, you can pack a flight at the wrong price, right? So if you're not pricing at a level that you're profitable, there's no point in packing my flight at the wrong price.
No,
So
I'm sure there are some good accountants at Sri Lankan Airlines.
so it's a little more complex than that. So some routes are profitable, some routes are not. Some leases are, I mean, these are all wet leases, right? These aircraft. So some based on some aircraft leases, you're profitable, some you're not. And of course, with Sri Lankan Airlines, the problem is its starting balance sheet. Right, we've made so much losses, it's got so much debt on the balance sheet. So the problem is, how do you deal with that? Now, there's different schools of thought. Take the debt out and sell the airline with the catering business, which is very profitable, or without the catering business. So there are various permutations to this, and somebody needs to resolve it. But at the end of the day, we got to bite the bullet. We can't avoid the fact that there is this debt on this entity. Either we take it back onto the state balance sheet and pay it off over time using taxpayer money, because otherwise there is no value on the asset you're selling.
The point is, this government has decided very categorically that they will not sell state-owned enterprises.
Yes, so this goes back to what I said earlier, Shamir. There is an ideological problem here, right? See, take a step back, right? The issue we have with this government is they want the widest mandate possible, right? They want the widest.
109 members in parliament is not easy. For
Exactly.
the first time ever.
Not only that, Shamir, right throughout our political history, nobody who got this kind of majority got it with that kind of mandate. They want every demographic, they want every class, they want every ethnicity, they want every geography, right? JR didn't win. JR 5-6 didn't got barely over 50% of the
97-7 elections.
97-7. When Gotabaya won also, he didn't win the north and the east. These guys are not short of political capital. The problem is, if there is any constraint that they are facing on reforms, whether it is selling Sri Lankan Airlines or anything for that matter, it is ideological, right? And they need to get off the mindset that a state-driven model and a socialist model will work. It won't. I mean, even to pay for socialist principles, you need a capitalist tax base. Otherwise, how do you pay for your socialist principles, right? And a state-driven business model is not going to pay for itself. The circularity makes it illogical. And to give you a different perspective to it, because we all know that, the government involvement in our economy is high by many statistics, the employment numbers, 1.3 million people. I find it's difficult to find that number. But the converse number you can find, which is the private sector involvement in the economy. If you look at private sector credit as a percentage of GDP for Sri Lanka, and you rank it along all the 194 countries on this planet, we are well below in the lower 50th percentile. That tells you in itself that our private sector is small. I mean, leaving aside whether the private sector is efficient and all of that alone, the private sector is small. So you're starting.
No, but the comparison is wrong. No, Chanaka, you can't compare with. You have to compare with apples to apples. No.
What do you mean?
The size of the country's economy should be looked at.
No. So I'm against the size of the economy. As a percentage of GDP, private sector credit is about 30-32%, somewhere around there. Which, if you rank that number as a percentage, the percentage number, if you rank it along all the countries in the world, we are
No. Let's look at, just give me some examples. Which country are you comparing it with?
every country.
No, forget about, let's say you
All,
can't compare with
all the
India.
all the
For
developed
example,
countries.
you can't
You look at
compare India and Sri
Malaysia.
Lanka.
You look at Malaysia. You look at all. I can't remember where India stood, but you look at all the countries that we
India private
aspire
sector
to
is
be.
very big.
You, as a percentage of their GDP, I can't remember, but you look at all the countries that we are aspiring to be as a next phase of growth, let's say, we are well below all of those. So our private sector
Which
is
country
small
are we
because,
aspiring to be?
no, I don't know, whatever you want to pick. I mean, now we are falling behind every country as we go along. We started in the 70s above Japan and Singapore and everybody, now we're all below that.
So I have one final question to Rohantha. Rohantha, now, you were the former chairman of EDB. How important is it to get into a proper block? Because we know that SAARC is now defunct. I have not seen a meeting of the South Asian Association of Regional Cooperation countries for a very long time. How important is it for us to get into a proper block or even sign free trade agreements with other nations to make sure that we get a good competitive advantage and we are not on the losing side, nor are we on the winning side. It has to be a win-win situation.
See, I think the way forward is rather than blocks, it's bilateral. And I mean, if you have 14 flights a day from Jaffna and you got another around 84 flights a day from Colombo, and you also have a ferry service that is touching, and now very soon a cargo boat where you can take 60 kilos at 18,000 rupees, and that economy is at $4.3 trillion. I mean, bilateral is the way forward, Shamir, and by 2030 the Indian economy is going to be something like 7.1 trillion. So
right.
way forward is bilateral. I mean,
Right,
look
so
at
you say bilateral agreements are important now. We saw the manner in which how President Wickramasuriya went to India and signed MOUs, but people are not aware of the contents of this MOU.
Yeah, see, there is the political side.
Well, I'm not done. My question has more aspects to it. Then we were imposed a 20% tariff from the US. Dhananath on this very show said there is never a free lunch. There has to be something that has to be given away, but we don't know the contents of that either. So how is it a win for the people?
See, that's what I'm saying. See, there is the political side, and I'm looking at the trade side, Shamil. So from a trade perspective, we need to see some road and light on the comprehensive economic partnership, because India has basically said we are going to give you 30 million pieces of apparel to be from Sri Lanka. Right now it's only 7 million, and we know that we are going to have a crunch with the US because there is that market is shrinking. We know that consumption has dropped by something like 4.8% because of the price increase, inflation. So, I mean, we need to have a very clear thrust bilaterally with India, but if there is a block, maybe it's Africa. I mean, right now as we speak, the African continent, our exports are growing at 30%, while NAFTA and EU is just growing by 4 and 8%. So that market is flat. So, but the question is that we have just 2 officers in the African market. I think I said this once before in one of these shows that we have one in South Africa, and I mean that's it. So if you are interested about a block, African market is the way forward, and
but if you look at countries like when the US tariff was imposed, just several months after, we saw the Russian president going to China. We saw the Indian president, prime minister going to China as well. Now we hear that the Russian president is going to visit India by the end of December. So being a formidable force in the world now has a say, or must we be on a non-aligned attitude?
From a trade perspective, I would say always look at comparative advantage. I mean, just because we have signed a FTA with Thailand, what has happened? It's a $482 billion economy. We have nothing to export. They want semiconductors. There is one, I met this person who is in charge of commercializing research in Thailand, and his whole job is reporting how he is going to tie up in terms of getting semiconductors not to be imported to Thailand, and it's going to be self-sufficient. So, that's the kind of direction you're looking at. So, I think while the world is getting into all these kinds of political dimensions because of this imbalance that is happening in the US, I think our perspective should be stay simple, tie up with India.
Right.
If
One-
India
right,
goes through,
right.
Shamir, you have the top end of tourists that will come into Sri Lanka, because right now they are going to Maldives.
Right.
And secondly is that you get your exports right on the apparel front, the tea side, you will have very good links on the cinnamon side, and the porcelain, you have a beautiful balance, because you're looking at 400 million households who are above the middle income group.
For that, you have to have some aggressive young people pointed to higher positions, no?
See,
Rohantha?
it's not only the policy making, Shamir. I think the private sector also has a role in terms of actually putting pressure to the policymakers on the correct direction that you need to go. So it's a two-way. I mean, you take the Export Development Board. What's the money he has? 100 million rupees. 100 million is enough to run that whole operation. That's why, even though we say that it would be great for them to start opening offices in the African region, you need money for that. So with 100 million, there's nothing you can do.
The problem is, Rohantha, you said the private sector has to put pressure, but even the private sector is divided. Now tell me one time that the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce has issued a statement about the problems faced by the private sector in the country. I saw this happening in 2010. I saw this happening in 2015. But when was it last done? When the exporters' profitability was taxed from 15% to 30%, what happened? Nothing.
See, Shamil,
Now the SVAT has come into play. What has happened? Nothing.
You're spot on. I mean, unless the private sector rally around and say, I want certain things to be
Close
done.
it down and only certify the country of origin. That's about it. That's all the chamber does.
So, I like when the economy gets into a rough patch, because at least then people can get united. I mean, on this SVAT issue, I mean, we know that private sector is divided. Let's go for the first 3 months. Let's see what happens, and then the private sector will become united.
No, but as we speak, 3 chambers have gone to courts and had filed a writ petition. So some chambers are at least doing something. So we can't put all of them into one basket, unfortunately.
No, but we got to watch as to how the other chambers are going to latch on. I mean, this is, I think, the BOI and the export processing zone chambers that has come in.
Right.
So,
thanks a lot, Rohantha. Let's just sum up. Do not bring any new arguments. I'm sure you all are not going to fight here, but for good sake, just don't bring out new arguments in the final round. Let's start off with Chanaka. What are your final thoughts, Chanaka? I'll give you 2 minutes.
No, so final thoughts, Samir, is we're at a unique point in history, and I think I mentioned this to you. We have a socialist government in power, relatively left-leaning, and with a supermajority, and we have an opposition which arguably is right-wing liberal. So if the government is ideologically convinced to push through reforms, it is the most politically palatable position it can be, because hopefully then you will have an opposition that won't oppose it. I don't think we've ever been in that point in history, because every time a government tried to create reforms, you had somebody in opposition trying to stop it. So hopefully this time around, as long as the government is ideologically convinced, we will have these reforms go through in Parliament and be implemented. So I'm still rather hopeful, but let's see.
Usually, Chanaka, I don't ask questions in the last round, but because you said about the opposition, I have to ask.
I knew I opened up a can of worms.
So are you trying to say the SJB-led opposition is defunct?
Well, I mean, look, government has 2/3 in Parliament, right? That in itself says, I can push through anything I want. right?
Chanaka,
But-
with three members in parliament, they made it to 159.
Yeah.
With one member in parliament, he went on to become the president of the country. Are you trying to say the STB does not have the wit and might?
No, I mean, I don't
do
know.
that.
But all I'm saying is if reforms are brought to the floor, I'm hopeful that an opposition won't oppose it. Because,
But don't worry, they won't do it.
all right, I'll take your word for it.
They won't or they can't.
Well, both. Ideologically, they shouldn't.
Right. Anyway, we will leave it at that. Let the people decide.
Let the
So thanks, Chanaka Wickramasuriya,
Thank you.
economic consultant. Today wearing a different hat altogether. Rohantha.
See, I think, we go from one panel discussion to different kinds of programs like this, and we talk all policy perspective at a very high level. I think now the discussion needs to start getting a little bit more hands-on to what's going to happen at the ground end. And my view is small medium enterprises is a forgotten set of people, and they're 52% of the economy, but they don't have a proper voice. And like you very rightly say, the chambers that are there are also kind of divided about the SME sector. So I think there should be very strong policy to the small medium enterprises, not just looking at access to finance and policy, but operationally asking at a ground level, at a provincial level, as to how they can be brought into the system so that they can be on the mainstream. But I think I'm very, very positive on Sri Lanka, because this year we are going to be $100 billion economy, and they say that any country which crosses the 100 billion mark, as per what the words of Simon Arnold, he says, they tend to have a very strong attraction towards better quality export markets, attracting top quality tourists and better FDI. And today, since the government gave the first visa for a person who has invested $100,000, I think we're on the right track, and I'm hopeful.
Thank you very much, Rohantha. Because I asked a question from Chanaka, I can't let you go as well. I'll pose a question to you as well. So you're saying the country's economy is going to be 100 billion, and you say that you're optimistic about the exports, but aren't you seeing a dark cloud hovering the export sector in the country because of this SVAT issue?
I'm pretty worried because reforms should be done in a way so that ease of doing business is not going to get impacted, because that's what World Bank continues to say. But then if it's the agenda is that your whole theme is going to be on the governance and corruption model, I'll put my hand up to governance and corruption, Shamir, to see how this leakage can pick in. But I hope the agility is there, that if we have to reverse within 2 months, that agility exists, rather than letting the good work of everybody who has done to get impacted. So
one question again, I just want to ask you. If someone tells you, build a highway and there's corruption involved, would you raise your hand, or would you raise your hand to say, no corruption, no highway?
See, Shamir, you have hit the nail right on the head, actually, because economic theory says that corruption and economic development goes hand in hand. When you tighten the economy in terms of reducing the entrepreneurship venture, economy squeezes. So these are, we could debate on this continuously. But then the question is, in 2010, when we knew that we were going to move away from a low-income country, and we knew that we were not going to have access, preferential access to funds plus grants, and you knew that you were moving from 3% to a 6 to 8%, then getting into a model where there is so much of leakage is suicide. So somebody lost the insight that till 2010 we were low income, we had access to finance at very high levels of 30, 40 years.
So again, simply, Rohantha, would you raise a hand, corruption plus highway, or no highway, no corruption?
Right
One
now,
or two?
I would go for governance, Shamir.
No, I'm asking you.
No corruption.
No corruption, no highway.
Because I mean, you're the most corrupt country in the world.
Right.
IMF in the dialogue studies say.
Yeah, just wanted your opinion, Rohantha, as always. Daniel, final remarks.
I think the two biggest challenges the country faces today in terms of the economy are the fact that 20% of our population is under the poverty line. And secondly, that our export share is declining over the last couple of decades. So addressing these should be our immediate priority. And in order to do this, we need to cut down PAL, cess, and other para-tariffs. We need to accelerate public investment that is significantly below our peers and that is declining year on year. We also need to unlock investment via reform of our factor markets, land, labor, and capital. This we've discussed over the course of the show, but I would submit that for the purposes of the budget, one thing should be prioritized, which addresses all these constraints, which is we can't fix all of this in one go. But one thing we can fix is in very specific areas, which is what free trade zones are meant to be. The Clootrack free trade zone solved many of these problems for foreign investors in a very limited area. And it has proved to be a huge success. The vast majority of our manufactured exports come from zones. However, most of the zones near Colombo are at 100%, all the zones near Colombo are at 100% capacity. The new zones we're building are far away and are sometimes struggling with capacity. What we need today is we need zones near Colombo, we need large zones, and we need private sector managed zones. Because private sector managed zones, A, are run a lot better, B, we need the investment which the government doesn't have in order to invest in those zones, and perhaps most importantly, global zone operators have direct relationships with the people who will come and set up factories there, with the electronics manufacturers, with the automotive part manufacturers, with all sorts of other manufacturers. So if I would submit, if there's one thing the government can do today in terms of fixing the economy for the medium and long term, is to get 2 or 3 large zone operators in the Western province.
Right. Daniel, because I asked questions from Rohantha and Chanaka, I don't want to leave you isolated. I'll ask a question as well. On the same front that you spoke about, these free trade zones, I happen to have had a chat with a very successful entrepreneur who was operating in a particular zone in question, and he has done extremely well. I asked him, why isn't Sri Lanka looking at these zones? And he said, Shamir, it's not about just 1 or 2 zones. We have to look at the entire country as a free trade zone. That's how we should start capitalizing. Do you agree with this thinking?
Yes and no. Yes, in the sense that all the issues we discussed over the course of this show need to be addressed. However, sometimes that's challenging to do all in one go. But zones allow you to do that in a very specific place, in a much faster way, and to run it as a pilot. So what happened is, you try the stuff in the zones. If it works really well, you expand it to the rest of the country. So I don't see zones and reforms across the economy as mutually exclusive. I see them as complementary.
Okay, thank you very much, Daniel. Dhananath.
So when it comes to policy reform, Shamir, there are policy reform windows. I think we are heading to one with the budget for 2026. First thing, if the best justice that the government could do for the tourism industry and for the remittances, people who are overseas, who are sending money to build their houses, toilets, bathrooms, pantry cupboards, the best thing that they could do is cut down the para-tariffs. It helps the industry, it helps the tourism sector, it helps the poor man. If you walk just outside, you can see how many people are struggling. They cannot finish their they can only finish the ground floor. They cannot finish their second floor, and most of the houses are in incomplete stages. So first, we have to cut down para-tariffs, because competitiveness is built in factories, not in tariff books. And I think the Ministry of Industries has to step up to promote industries but not to protect industries, number one. Number two, to happen all that, one success that we have is to an extent on the central bank independence. Our inflation is somewhat stable. That's a key factor to speak about, even to brag about the stability that we all now discuss. So it's important that we keep the sound money aspect first, because sound money is the first investment incentive. Third, property rights. We spoke about Bimsavir, because without unleashing the land capital, there is no future. If we speak about growth, without unlocking this land capital, no short term growth, no long term growth. Property rights are the bridge between the effort and the enterprise. That is what Rohantha spoke about. Fourth point, we spoke about closing down of, like, winding up of the operation of 2 banks. If you actually check the CEOs of most of the local banks, you will be surprised that they have been worked at these international banks, and they are actually bringing that know-how to the local banking sector. That's how important the foreign direct investment and building the human capital. For that, we have to invest in human capital, because human capital is country's only compounding asset. My final point, since Shamir was asking an additional question like a subsidy from all of us, certainly it is cheaper than subsidy. So keeping the tax policy consistent, keeping the policies consistent is cheaper than trying to give away subsidies in the coming budget. And as Thomas Sowell famously said, the first principle in economics is the resources are the scarce, the scarcity of the resources. But the first principle in politics is to forget the first principle in economics. I hope we will not forget both and strive to grow the economy.
Because Dhananath, if I don't ask you a question, all the other 3 people are going to get angry with me. I want to shake their hands before they leave tonight's studio. So I'm going to ask you a question. Now, you always have this famous analogy, you bring this cricket scenario into play. So I thought my final question is on that. So when Sri Lanka exited the Asia Cup, Dhananath, the lessons that we learned, especially in the last match with India, is that one man alone can't win a match. It has to be an entire team. Do you see effectiveness and efficiency right throughout the cabinet of ministers in this present government?
Absolutely, yes. I think coming back to your cricket analogy, Shamir, what happened with the Indian-Sri Lanka match was we got overjoyed by one player scoring a century, but overall, if you look at what happened, we got overjoyed and forgot that actually we lost the match, and even we could not enter the finals. I think the current status of the economy is the same. We are getting carried away by outlier event all the time, forgetting the bigger picture. Same relates to the cabinet. I think we have few people who are performing, and we are depending on them, and sometimes we suppress the pain, the overall bigger pain, by commenting on one player's performance, which is good. That player has to be commended, but ultimately we have to remember that we have lost the match and we are not in the finals.
So it's just like the country's economy. We may have won in the short term, but in the long term, we may lose if we don't get act together.
Most of the time when we think of that one particular event and forget the rest of it, we lose short term as well as long term.
Right. Thank you very much, Dhananath Fernando, CEO of Advocata Institute. Thank you very much, Daniel Alphonsus, CEO of The Examiner. He took up the role just a couple of weeks ago. So all the best to you in your new endeavor, Daniel. Thank you very much, Dr. Rohantha Athukorala, former chairman, EDB, CEO of Clootrack, South Asia, and also Chanaka, Wickramasuriya, economic consultant. Thank you very much, Chanaka, for joining us. Thank you. You were wearing a different hat, as I said before. Today, a completely different hat. So thank you very much for that. Thanks a lot, independent journalist Shihar Aniz, for joining us this evening on the show. And you too, for sending in questions to our panelists this evening on the number 07665655353. I leave you tonight with a quote, as I always do. Reforms end not in contemplation, but in action. Take care and good night.